So a little bit about Professor Cooper. She is an assistant professor of women's and gender studies as well as Africana studies at Rutgers. She has a bachelor's from Howard University with degrees both in English and in political science, and is a doctorate, or has a PhD rather, in American Studies from Emory University in Atlanta. She is a self-avowed hip-hop generation feminist, which I'm sure many of you here can relate with. And as a scholar of black women's intellectual history, she, in her work, writes about black feminist thought, about race, about gender, and how these come together, particularly in analyzing popular culture. She writes, and she has written extensively and published on both historic as well as contemporary manifestations or iterations of black feminist theorizing, and we'll get a taste of what that looks like in her talk tonight. And is currently finishing up her first book, called Race, Women, Gender and the Making of a Black Public Intellectual Tradition. She is indeed a public intellectual and is already very well recognized as such. In fact, we are lucky that we managed to get her tonight, and she didn't cancel on us because right after this program she has to race off to be interviewed on the Chris Hayes show. So be sure to tune into that. When does it start?
It'll be on tonight from 8 to 9.
From 8 to 9. So she will leave us a little bit sooner than I would imagine, probably around 7:30, so that she can make the program. So that's very cool. And she has been a co-founder along with Dr. Susanna Morris of something that I think many of us in this room are familiar with, which is the Crunk Feminist Collective. I just love that word, crunk, right? And she is a feminist, which is a feminist of color, scholar, activist group, which has run for many years now a very successful blog, so you can definitely look that up and read her blogs on it, and especially knowing that it has been named as one of the top 25 black blogs to watch in 2012 by Root.com. She has also, the same blog has also been called one of the top lady blogs by New York Magazine. And what the collective does, in addition to posting interesting blogs about everything, right, just about, and analyzing them from this intersectional perspective that I was talking about a few minutes ago, it also conducts speaking tours, it conducts workshops, and engages in a whole range of activist causes that are related to women's causes, women's issues, and she blogs for it under the name of Crunktastic. So can we give a round of applause to our Crunktastic Brittney Cooper.
Good evening. Good evening. So I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much for this invitation. This is exciting, and it's nice to come in my state, my current state of residence of New Jersey, and hang out and talk about some of the things that I'm really passionate about. So thank you so much for the invitation. What I want to do tonight is to talk a bit about race, hip hop, and feminism. There's a lot to say about that. So want to talk through the beginning stages of a second book. So I'm finishing a first book, almost done with that, and I'm working on a second book called Killing Me Softly, Race, Hip Hop, and the Feminism, Hip Hop, and the Rise of Neoliberalism, which is my fun book. So this current book is the book you have to do to prove that you're like a scholar. And then the second book is the book that I'm doing where I can do my shit, right? So I hope that y'all are not squeamish about cursing because this is a hip hop talk. You should expect it. And I also just curse. So there's that. So yeah. Let me begin. And I'm not sure what's going on with the internet connection, so I have videos. I'm going to assume that many of you have seen these songs, so if the videos don't play, I'm sorry about that, and I will definitely talk through them, so I want to give you my apologies up front. But yes, so crunk feminism is a term that I co-created with the members of the Crunk Feminist Collective in 2010. We really created the term in about 2004. And the Crunk Feminist Collective, as you've heard, is my crew. We're a hip-hop generation feminist blogging collective. And our mission statement says, as part of the larger women of color feminist politic, crunkness, in its insistence on the primacy of the beat, contains a notion of movement, timing, and of meaning-making through sound that is especially productive for our work together. Percussion, by definition, refers to the sound, vibration, or shock caused by the striking together of two bodies. Combining terms like crunk and feminism and the cultural, gendered, and racial history signified in each is a percussive moment, one that signals the kind of productive dissonance that occurs as we work at the edges of disciplines, on the margins of social life, and in the vexed spaces between academic and non-academic communities. Our relationship to feminism in our world is bound up with a proclivity for the percussive, as we divorce ourselves from correct or hegemonic ways of being in favor of following the rhythm of our own heartbeats. In other words, what others may call audacious or crazy, we call crunk, because we are drunk off the heady theory of feminism that proclaims that another world is possible. So the Crunk Feminist Collective situates crunkness, a term which characterizes a particular brand of Atlanta-based hip-hop music, as what we call an embodied mode of resistance. One that, in taking into account the experiences of young women of color, particularly black women, is as concerned with the politics and practice of feminism, that is, how we do our feminism, as with the ways that black female embodiment within hip-hop culture, the academy, and mainstream feminism might inform a kind of feminist resistance. So what I want to do in this talk is take up the claim in the CFC mission statement that crunkness is percussive and consider what kinds of analytic, methodological, and political possibilities a percussive approach to feminist practice and movement building makes possible. So I think I should just tell you that part of the way that we came to the Crunk Feminist Collective is because, this is the early 2000s, we're in grad school, we're in Atlanta, it's crunk, I'm Southern, I'm from Louisiana, crunk music is the music I grew up with. It is still the music. If you heard what I listened to on the way up here, you'd be like, she's real ratchet, which is not true. And so crunkness is a kind of beat-laden Southern hip-hop. And what was happening was we were all sort of coming into our feminist consciousness. I was 22, 23 at the time, really trying to think about what it meant to identify as a feminist, but at the same time I was like, but I like this music. And the music is heavily misogynistic, that's simply true. It's also fun. It's also the only kind of music you can really dance to. You cannot dance to conscious hip hop. You can't do it. Or they're like 2 or 3 songs, but it won't last you a whole night. So what are you gonna do? So we were like, we want to figure out how to blend these things. And our professors were like, hip hop is terrible and misogynistic and patriarchal. And we're like, yeah, but really though, like, we go to the club, we're not gonna give it up. So how do we combine things that we're passionate about with the politic, and how do we say that we get to bring our whole selves to both spaces, right? That if we're in the club and the music is about raping women, about particular acts of violence towards women, we don't have to condone that, right? We might overlook a few bitches and hoes. Real talk. Right? Because when I became a feminist, I learned that feminists call women bitches more than anybody else in the world, right? It's like the supreme irony, right? It's like preachers' children are the worst children, right? It's like, you go to get your hair and nails done and the nail technician's nails aren't done. Like, the people, you know what I mean? Like, that is our feminist contradiction, is that we're not always great about this. So, like, we can overlook that, but if you're like trying to rape women or something, or condone that, then we're not down for that. We'll walk off the dance floor and ruin your party. But at the same time, when we come into the classroom, we're not going to give up our generational soundtrack. Because our teachers were in class talking about, well, the blues was healing music. And it was like, but lady, we were born in 1985. And so the blues is like stuff our parents, our grandparents listened to, so we're not going to listen to that, right? And so it became a way to both reclaim our generational inheritance, but at the same time, also be clear that some of what is in the music is deeply problematic, and we think that critique can exist in the same space as creativity, and that we can have fun and also have a political perspective. So that is what we mean when we say that our feminism is percussive. that it strikes together things that don't necessarily go together. The two epistemologies, and epistemology is a fancy word for a knowledge system, right? Or two competing worldviews, or two histories, signified in the terms hip-hop and feminism, indicate the presence of a percussive relationship. And hip-hop thrives on percussive moments, like the clashing of voices in a freestyle battle, or the crowd's eruptions after a tight freestyle response, or the mixing of unexpected and dissonant beats from a master turntablist, the shock of a female MC who brings wreck in a battle with a male MC. And contemporary black feminism also has percussive roots because it emerges out of the struggle of black women activists during the civil rights movement and the Black Power era to have their concerns as black women validated as being a legitimate part of a racial agenda. So percussive feminism allows for the creativity that ensues from placing modes or objects of inquiry together that might not traditionally fit. And I argue that the percussive nature of crunk encodes a relationship to the moving, gyrating black female body, and that this body matters in contemporary iterations of feminist politics. First, feminist politics are inherently invested in movement building, and movements are not transformative unless the people actually move. Also, in order for feminist politics to feel like home, like a place worthy of our political investment and attachment, we must attend to the ways in which these spaces move us. So Sarah Ahmed argues that, quote, the relationship between movement and attachment is instructive. What moves us, what makes us feel, is also that which holds us in place or gives us a dwelling place. So the refusal of young women of color to move on from hip hop has everything to do with how the music makes them feel. So what I'm essentially saying is, we can't keep on talking about how to have a feminist politic where what you're asking folks to buy into is the notion that it's all bad, it's all terrible, don't watch it, don't listen to it. Because the reality is we feel something, and what we feel actually matters and is important and has to matter for our politics. Second, the exhilarating, bass-driven, intoxicating nature of Southern crunk music routinely moves crowds who are enticed by infectious beats and dark, smoky, booming dance spaces in which pleasure becomes sticky, both in the sense that Ahmed means when she refers to affect as sticky, but also in the way that sweaty, gyrating bodies grind against one another, clothes sticking to bodies, feet sticking to the floor, pleasure clinging in the air, pleasure that is felt on the surface of skin as bodies press together, riding the beat. I'm trying to make space for pleasure, right? And I'm like, have y'all been attending good parties? Because that's how good parties were when I was your age. I mean, I don't go to parties like that now because if I get too low, then I might not be able to get up. But back in the day, this is how good parties were, right? So that kind of moment, right, where everything is sticky and sweaty and pleasurable, demands theorization, but exceeds traditional forms of feminist sermonizing about the objectification of women's bodies. So if you're taking any feminist class, it's like, I'm being objectified. And it's like, yeah, and something else is happening too. So I want to make space for the notion that our bodies are being objectified, and then consider what happens when you kind of like it a little bit. But also that's not the only thing happening in any given moment of interaction, right? So if it is true, as Ahmed argues, that emotions matter for politics, and that emotions show us how power shapes the very surfaces of our bodies as well as our worlds, then I argue that it is this feeling of pleasure, this relationship to the beat, this refusal of members of the hip-hop generation to give up the right to these kinds of dark, pleasure-laden, often musically misogynistic spaces that are central to understanding the way that the hip-hop generation makes sense of feminism. It is this percussive moment where bodies, many, many black female and black queer bodies ride the beat to all abandon that I seek to mine for a notion of what it might tell us about how to do our feminism. So, what does it actually mean to get crunk? No job. He's great. He's really great. Okay. So, to understand crunk is to understand how hip-hop, in this case Southern hip-hop, conjugates language in such a way that black people's relation to it is less a corrupting, and because frequently we're accused of corrupting good English, right? Good corporate standard English, because black folks are really not interested, not culturally, right, in sustaining good English. And so this is less about a way that we corrupt the language and more an interpolation, which is a fancy theoretical term for kind of calling forth, right? A way that we emerge because of what is being said. So it's the kind of language that calls us, that allows us to call forth ourselves as who we are, or rather as who we be. Despite urban legends about crunk as a portmanteau or mashup of crazy and drunk, that's what some people say. But they say that, but that's not quite it, right? In its most basic iteration, it refers to the infusing of energy into a system so that it speaks the loudest, can be undeniably heard, and makes its most significant impact. So having been in existence for a full 2 decades now, the most recent iteration of crunk within pop music can be found in this idea of the turn up, right, or getting turned. Whenever y'all started to say that, I was like, they saying the same thing, right? Because to crank something is to turn it, right? See, I know that y'all don't use radios anymore with knobs where you actually have to manually turn things up, but the word crunk was invented in a moment where you had to turn it up, literally. So crunk is both the past tense and the past participle of to crank, actually, like cranking a car, right? So the onomatopoeic hydraulic crunk calls forth that distinct sound of cranking up an old Monte Carlo like the one my mama had, or an old Cutlass. It's the telltale right, that infuses energy into the system. So crunk means essentially to be all the way turned up. They mean exactly the same thing. It means to have turned up, and crunk feminism, by extension, is feminism all the way turned up, right? So the turn up is both a moment and a call. It's both a verb and a noun. It is both anticipatory and complete. Meaning, once you're crunk, you're already crunk, and you're also anticipating that there is more crunkness that will ensue. Right? It is thrisely incantation, invitation, and inculcation. To live, to move, to have one's being. The turn up is process, it is posture and purpose. It points to an alternative register of expression that turns out or up to be the most authentic register, because it is not merely who we are, but who we be. To be black or to be non-white in the West is to live in a world that expects us to live in a state of being turned down, unobtrusive, inconspicuous, and ornamental. We're to both turn down and tone down. And you hear that a lot, right? Because Black Lives Matter, the movement is all the way turned up, right? And everybody wants them to turn down. Stop burning shit down, stop stopping traffic, stop taking things over, right? But this is the master narrative of how white supremacy interacts with black and brown bodies. So this has been, this call, this demand to turn down and tone down has also been the experience of many women of color in the academy. Our presence is loud even when we are completely silent. So sisters, have you ever been walking along, minding your business, and a white person says to you, "Why are you so mad?" I'm not mad, I'm thinking. And I don't want to be thinking about you. You know, like, so it's like you're screaming at people when you're not saying anything, right? Yeah. So our presence is loud even when we are completely silent. Your silence will not protect you. Audre Lorde screams to us from the pages of history. It is in the face of these circumstances that we call upon and conjure our crunkest selves. It is, as Bone Crusher, a key purveyor of crunk, says. He says, crunk music is an energy, a feeling. It is anarchy. It's pandemonium. It is a refusal to be contained. It is resistance, and in it, and here's Lil Jon's fundamental existential question. Turn down for what? So this is the sociology of crunk spaces, right? Dancing, drinking, chanting at the top of your lungs with your crew. And in the very first crunk dance from so Lil Jon came up with the first crunk song in like 1994 because I was a kid. And it was called Who You With. And so he would say Who You With, and everybody else would say Get Crunk. So it would be Get Crunk, Who You With. That's the song. So Lil Jon's question initiates a call and response. Frequently Frequently, Lil Jon can be heard screaming "what" on any number of crunk songs, as he does on Turn Down For It, a question that demands a response, even if the response is simply to repeat the line. So what Bone Crusher's notion of crunk anarchy points to is a kind of pleasurable black abandon, a submission to the circulation of energy as crunk music plays at its shrillest and trillest of levels in the club. That energy to which he refers is identifiably crunk. And people who've ever been in a club during a Dirty South set where a heavy rotation of southern rap music is played, and if you should ever be in a club with me and that's happening, don't talk to me. Just dance, because I will be dancing. So if you've ever been in that situation, you can feel the club reaching higher and higher levels of pandemonium. As more and more bodies get crunk, that is, as they capitulate to the turn-up, pleasure circulates as affect, such that pleasure becomes palpable, sticky, and transferable. And in this kind of affective economy, that's Ahmed's term, kinetic orality, which is Kira Gong's term, becomes the language of choice, and kinetic orality is the way that you speak through movement. It is black women R&B singers with deep roots in hip-hop that can help us to make the most sense of this work of kinetic orality. So I'm actually going to turn then to talk about my favorite person to talk about, Beyonce. Okay. She's not an MC, but she is a black woman that is a member of the hip-hop generation whose music is deeply shaped by the hip-hop generation. So, deeply shaped by the aesthetics of hip-hop, I should say. So when Beyonce dropped her eponymous 5th album in December of 2013, she took the bold step of proudly proclaiming the label of feminist in 2 songs on the album, Flawless and Partition. Now the term appears routinely in her concert performances. Although many Beyonce fans considered her choice a boon to feminist movement building, others have been absolutely infuriated at what they viewed as a gimmick, a stunt, and a total disregard for the tenets of radical feminist politics in favor of Beyonce's capitalistic, sex-positive, potentially neoliberal brand of feminism. The complicated and fraught relationship that feminists have to Beyonce, and in particular to her iconicity, is a hip-hop feminist case study in what Joan Morgan might call fucking with the grays. We can talk more in the question and answer about Beyonce's feminism, but suffice it to whether she gets to claim it, right? But suffice it to say, I think she does. I have come out in print and said, I think Beyonce gets to be a feminist. One, because, you know, people were saying things like, well, you know, she's just doing it for a gimmick. She's just doing it for street cred. And I kept thinking, in what world is claiming feminism going to get you any street cred? Who does it for a gimmick? She was already Beyonce. She doesn't need it. It does not materially do anything for her. It actually doesn't, right? If people like the music, they're going to listen regardless. No one was like, Beyonce's a feminist, now I got to listen to her. It's like, if you don't like it, you don't listen. So I can't see what is to be gained. So I'm sort of more interested in a more generous interpretation about why she might, as a human being, as opposed to her iconic self, right, as opposed to her representation, why might she as a person adopt a feminist policy, right? What might she think feminism can do for her as a very powerful woman in a pretty traditional marriage to a very powerful man, now with a baby, have to do with feminism? So my sense is that feminism is doing some work for her that is not about the gimmick, but it's about giving her language to think about how she is positioned in this moment. But we can talk about that more. Because the other thing to talk about when we talk about that is why does Beyonce claim that feminism make people so mad? I mean, it makes people hopping mad. And I'm like, why? You know, I mean, I really want to know. I have some thoughts about that. But I really want to know why. The last thing is, I'm not going to ever tell another sister whether she gets to do anything, because I wish somebody would tell me that I get to claim feminism. I might call somebody a bitch today in my sleep or under my breath, not to their face, and still claim feminism, because it's not my religion, it's my politic, which means I don't perform it perfectly, right? But I want to turn to her work, and it's important to do that because people be coming for Beyonce and they don't ever consider her body of work. And the sister's got a serious body of work. And so part of this play is to say to you, when we critique, let it be grounded in the work and not all of our suppositions about what we think people are trying to do, right? So in particular, I want to turn to 3 songs, Upgrade You, Get Me Bodied from the 2006 album B-Day, and then the song Partition from the 2013 album Beyonce, to think about how notions of percussion and crunkness pervade not just the musical backdrop of her songs, but also the politics expressed in her lyrics. Let me see if this will let me play a little bit of Upgrade You. No, let me see. Will it do it? Won't do it. I'm sorry. Do y'all know this song? Yes. Upgrade You? Good. Excellent. Okay. So in this song, she says, I can do for you what Martin did for the people, ran by the men, but the women keep the tempo. Did y'all hear that line? So even within this one line of lyrics, there are deeply contradictory gender politics. On the one hand, Beyonce claims her place as Martin Luther King of the people, a leader, a motivator, and one with the power to move crowds. In the next line, however, she concedes that the movement can be ran by the men, which I fundamentally disagree with. But then she says it is women who control the tempo. Women control the tempo, which means they control the timing and the beat. So in this moment, Beyonce places black women in percussive relationship to social movements. They become, she says, the beat, the tempo, the mechanism by which the movement, be it the civil rights movement or the circulation of hip-hop culture around the globe, keeps time. So in some ways, this means that the ability of the music to move women is critical to the sustenance of hip-hop culture. Now, unfortunately, this has often led to a reductive position for black women in hip-hop, who have been objectified as their gyrating asses are appreciated primarily for what they mean for men and for the project of heteronormative, male-driven sexual desire. But in her attempt to reclaim the beat as the space of female agency, Beyonce's Upgrade You offers other possibilities. What might it mean for hip-hop generation feminism if we understood women to keep the tempo of social movements? That's a really important question to ask in this moment, right? Where you see women on the front lines of Ferguson, right? They're the ones getting mowed down with rubber bullets and tear gas. They're the ones being arrested more even than dudes. Those are the narratives that we're now getting coming out of Ferguson, that women are really on the front lines. And so women are really driving the movement, right? Women are really putting their bodies on the line and also setting the pace. And there are 3 women who created the hashtag Black Lives Matter, right? So what does that mean? What might it mean to think that women literally are the watch by which the culture checks itself? So the idea that it is women who keep the tempo of movements is a percussive idea, one that emerges both from the social histories that have shaped the hip-hop generation's relationships to civil rights and black power, and one that emerges aesthetically also in the music. Southern hip-hop is driven by the drum, by a heavy bass line and prominent percussive elements. So in her hit track, Get Me Bodied, which I don't have video for, and in particular the extended mix, Beyonce lets a putative potential male suitor know that tonight she's getting bodied. And that if he wants her body, he better get me bodied. She asks him, can you get me bodied? I want to be myself tonight. Y'all know this song? Get me bodied, I want to be myself tonight. Heard it? I have long been struck by the fact that the sonic and performative style in which she delivers the lines makes it sound in multiple places as though she's declaring that she wants to get embodied. If you hear the song, she's saying get me bodied, but because of the way those words run together, it sounds like get embodied, right? It is through this process of getting embodied that she purports to be herself. So she declares that she want to party, want to dance, want to be myself tonight. That's interesting because those are her practices for getting embodied, right? Partying and dancing, right? So we think that when we're talking about getting embodied, we're talking about some serious cerebral set of practices. These sisters are saying that the way in which we learn to exist in the space of our bodies and own it and be comfortable has to do as much with all of that as with pleasure, right? So part of what I'm getting at is that one of the reasons we can't discard the sort of messiness of our pleasure spaces is because there's significant existential and ontological work happening in terms of how we inhabit these kinds of bodies. So we're in a moment where we're talking a lot about the Black body as being under attack from the state, right? And as being the victim of all kinds of structural violence. And yet, Black women are also offering us a narrative about what it means to actually exist and live in these bodies in ways that are fruitful, regenerative, and productive. And we miss that because we wanted to look a different kind of way, and they're saying, well, a lot of this happens in the club. And see, sometimes we can't explain it, but what I'm also saying is that it's a thing that we know that we can't always articulate, which is why we feel compelled to dance. If you're anything like me, you have a long writing project, in between getting on Facebook too much or whatever we all use now, Snapchat or whatever, I take dance breaks. Every like 15 minutes or a paragraph or something, I'm like, let me get up and twerk now. Like, you know? Because when you're in the midst of a really cerebral activity, sometimes the only thing to do to balance that is if you're really embodied activity. Alright? So when Beyonce's musical persona uses music and dance to get embodied, she engages kinetic orality as a kind of praxis, right? Or practice, right? Or set of practices that allows for full self-articulation. So this same kinetic orality is in play on Upgrade You, such that, on the one hand, even though it looks as if she is conceding to the political power dynamic in which men are allowed to lead, her usurpation of the tempo as the space that controls subverts these larger racial dynamics. If women control the beat of hip-hop culture, they control the culture. Because the culture, especially Southern hip-hop, which is the predominant hip-hop music at this moment, is deeply beholden to the beat. So percussivity and kinetic orality, which again is the way we speak through our bodies, are integral to affirmative articulations of Black female embodiment. And as such, percussivity and the affective role it plays in creating space for movement makes it central to a contemporary Black feminist politic, particularly among members of the hip-hop generation. Within hip-hop writ large, men have structured the culture so that they're usually the mic controllers or the MCs. But women, Beyonce argues convincingly, I think, are the beat controllers. So she returns to this idea forthrightly on Partition. Y'all seen Partition? And Beyonce, all over my mouth, like liquor, so. Oh, y'all are no fun, come on. I know it's sexy. In the song Partition, she sings and raps. Drop the bass, man, the bass get lower, radio say speed it up, I just go slower. High like treble, pumping on the mid, the man ain't ever seen a booty like this. And then she goes on to say, I sneezed on the beat and the beat got sicker. Beyonce all on his mouth like liquor. The way in which Beyonce controls the beat, going slower while being pressured to go faster, by the popular ear signified in the reference to the radio listener, suggests that she is the master of the tempo. Moreover, she isn't just offering a tutorial on how to put it in current parlance, she rides the beat, but also implied is how she controls the pace of coitus, of sex, wherein a male partner encourages her to go faster, and she says, I just go slower, right? We can surmise that the routine sexual command to go faster in hetero interactions often signals an imminent male orgasm. So the choice to go slower in the face of such a request, presumably while the woman is in the position to control the pace of the interaction, centers her pleasure. In all cases, Beyonce displaces phallic objects, be they male-controlled corporate radio or male-centered sexual interactions, through the way she rides the beat. In so doing, she explicitly links her booty with her machinations on the beat. So as the first part of the song, Beyonce transitions to the second part, Partition, a man chanting the word drums, drums, echoes, fade away into the background, orally marking its percussive elements. So in Partition and in crunk music more generally, the two percussive bodies in relationship are Black women's booties and the beat, which invites us to refigure the space of percussive feminism. Not only is one articulated through kinetic orality, but is one deeply tethered to the project of articulating a progressive erotics of the black female body. Beyonce's musical and kinetic theorization of the percussive demonstrates that a key feature of percussive feminism involves interrogating the terms and conditions of black female practices of embodiment. In his 2003 hit, I Love the Way You Move, on the Outkast double album Speakerboxx / The Love Below, rapper Big Boy proclaims that he loves being on the floor with women of all sizes who are entranced by a good beat. He thus wants to study, as a participant observer, how the girls ride the beat, which essentially means he wants to stare at gyrating rumps all around him. But the percussive aesthetic celebrated in the above excerpt, in which he declares, "Big girls need love too, no discrimination here. Let me study how you ride the beat, you big freak." So these percussive aesthetics celebrated in the above place the song squarely within the bass-laden, trunk-rattling aesthetic parameters of crunk. Like much of Southern rap, the visual expression of these percussive elements depends on the movements of a joyful, oral, kinetic female form. In no way does Big Boy escape the troubling use of women as decorative ornaments in rap videos, but the sonic quality of the song compels movement in a kind of Audre Lorde-inspired version of the erotic. The erotic connection functions in the open and fearless underlining of my capacity for joy, and the way my body stretches to music and opens into response, hearkening to its deepest rhythms. So every level upon which I sense also opens to the erotically satisfying experience, whether it is dancing, building a bookcase, writing a poem, or examining an idea. So music and dance provide modes of expressing otherwise inarticulable elements of African American experience. So too with hip hop. Black women and girls love crunk music just like men and boys do because it gets them by and allows them to be themselves. Does that moment of embodied, joyful self-expression happen outside of a political context that devalues black women's lives, sexuality, and subjectivity? Of course not. But percussive space is a space of contrarian impulses, a place where competing forces or ideas or forms of embodiment are brought together in forms of productive dissonance. So in 2010, Ciara, an Atlanta-based R&B singer, released a hit song called Ride, which I really wish you could see, but you should look up. So the sexually provocative video was subsequently banned by Black entertainment television because she's fully clothed, I mean sparingly, but still fully clothed, and they banned this video. So Treva Lindsay, Professor Treva Lindsay of Ohio State University, strongly disagreed with BET's censoring of Ciara's music, arguing that instead of being lewd and inappropriate, Ciara, and specifically the song Ride and Goodies, and I would add 2013's Body Party, offer black feminists, specifically hip-hop generation feminists, an opportunity to theorize contemporary, gyrating black female bodies from multiple standpoints. These kinds of songs provide a space for a new generation of African American women seeking to etch out expressive sites for their sexual realities. Unfortunately, black female sexuality still presents a challenging conundrum in the mainstream, which seems unable to read black women's bodies or sexual expressivity beyond respectability politics or outdated tropes about Jezebels and sapphires. And so the politics of respectability says, look, if I dress right, if I talk right, if I don't ever do anything wrong, then people will treat me right and I will have success, right? And so this is like black folks being like, pull up your pants, don't have too many babies, go to school, be educated, speak like you got some sense, right? Now I'm not saying that's not generally good life advice. Some of it is. Some of it is interesting. But the idea that you should be treated, that you should be valued as a human being and treated well as a citizen on the basis of that is completely dubious, right? Completely specious. So what happens is, in pop culture, anytime we see black women being sexual, all the politics of respectability show up. So we see it and we're like, well, isn't she just being isn't she being made into a Jezebel? Isn't she being made into a hoochie? Isn't she being objectified? And this is interesting in this moment where we got black women all over the television for like the first time in history. So tonight we got Being Mary Jane. On Wednesdays when Empire comes back, we got Cookie Lion. Y'all watch Empire?
Yeah.
I'm like, what room am I in? She is awesome. Yes. And then on Thursdays we got Shondaland. Yeah. Right? And so you got black women having sex on TV every night of the week. Right? But then, you know, I've had like so many debates and had to write a few pieces from dudes being like, well, why they all with white men? And it's like, dude, like they with the people that want them, and so whatever. And two, why we gotta, you know, why they can't be in good, normal relationships? I had a kid say to me recently, why can't any of the black women have normal relationships? But what that mean? Why can't you have whatever kind of relationship you would like to have? But the politics of respectability says that you're supposed to be in a heteronormative relationship, get married and have some children. And so Olivia Pope is like, nope, I want you, and I can have you both. And I might have another one on the side too. Like, I'm like, yes, win, black girl, win. Right? It makes people so upset because it's rooted in, one, a sort of respectability politic, and two, a long history of black women actually being sexually exploited. But part of what we're trying to do is say, look, we've always articulated a selfhood even in extreme conditions of oppression. And we can't just narrate our experience in terms of the conditions of oppression, pain, and trauma. So when we hold that lens with another lens about pleasure, what emerges? So I'm joining my good friend, Professor Lindsay's call, to write against a tendency in current black feminist scholarship where, as she puts it, a history of exploitation and dehumanization seemingly overdetermine performative boundaries of creative outlets for women of the African diaspora, and theoretical boundaries for black feminists seeking to theorize black female pleasure. So black women are caught in the expansive web of objectification to which we have historically responded with a politics of complete repression, right? So black women, they just act like babies just are born through immaculate conception, right? You're not supposed to talk about sex. When you're a respectable black woman, you're supposed to be buttoned down and buttoned up and professorial, right? So part of the reason I perform this way is because I'm saying, dude, I don't believe in that shit, right? Like I am a professor, but I am not a professor 24 hours a day, right? So we have responded with a politics of complete repression, shot through a discourse of respectability, and I just can't see how black women can navigate their way through that. So there has to be a better way, and I'm arguing that women in the realms of crunk aesthetics have been offering us a roadmap. And that's not because crunk music is inherently or wholly empowering in any of the conventional ways that a feminist might demand. In fact, I think the opposite is probably true. But in its persistent ability to make us move, crunk music, like hip-hop more generally, offers a kind of knowledge about ourselves that is not necessarily easily accessible. Lord says that our erotic knowledge empowers us and becomes a lens through which we scrutinize all aspects of our existence, forcing us to have to evaluate those aspects honestly in terms of their relative meaning within our lives. And this, she says, is a grave responsibility projected from within each of us, not to settle for the convenient, the shoddy, the conventionally expected, nor the merely safe. So percussive feminisms make visible this emergent epistemology of erotics, and by that I mean the way that we come to know ourselves through who we are in our intimate space, in our erotic lives. There's shit that you just will never know about yourself until you get an intimate life. I promise. Right? When I was like 20 years old running around college, you know, I was like grew up like a conservative Christian. Which is always interesting for college because you can never quite navigate the sexual politics and stay pure or whatever. And so as I'm trying to negotiate, like I would be having these terrible conversations with people about sex and about how they didn't need to do it and about how things couldn't really be that enjoyable. And that was until I had sex. And I was like, well, shit. That's not going to work out. Like, it totally rearranges you see what I mean? Right? And I'm saying that for people who are intersex. I mean, for asexual folks, they have to come to epistemology a bit differently, and I want to make space and acknowledge that. But for sexual beings, right, there's some shit that you only learn about yourself from the space of your intimate life. And so what does it mean that we haven't allowed Black women to full access to those spaces of articulation, either privately or publicly? I contend that that's a kind of epistemic violence, right? And that's why it's unacceptable. So, percussive feminism makes visible this emergent epistemology of erotics. And when Beyonce's musical persona declares that she needs to get bodied so she can be herself, she suggests that the kind of embodiment she experiences on the dance floor and spaces laden with sexual and erotic energy are integral to how she knows and understands herself. Sierra's song Ride and Body Party similarly participate in this erotic epistemology and offer an example of what is possible when the crunkiest, beat-driven, bass-laden sexual elements of hip-hop are celebrated. There's a celebration of the percussive relationship that Black women's bodies index to Southern hip-hop music, to crunk aesthetics, and to R&B. And both Big Boy and Sierra invoke this riding of the beat as a space of joy, sexual freedom, and as something to be studied. This kind of reading of percussive feminist potentiality within these spaces is exactly an example of a hip-hop feminist fucking with the grades. Moreover, it attunes us to an affective economy of pleasure, wherein studying how one rides the beat is an erotic act, an act saturated and sticky with the visual and oral pleasure of watching a Black woman's booty bump and grind against the beat that is heard but not seen. Her posterior becomes a visual representation for the beat, an oral kinetic performance that dictates the terms of movement. But this kind of understanding of a gyrating Black female ass is only possible within a percussive feminism not beholden to what Lindsay might call an overdetermined reading of Black women's behinds as always in all cases a site of exploitation. We are invited to watch Black women's ass mark time with the beat, and then we are invited, we, cis and trans, men and women, to join them on the dance floor. When we think of the beat as the medium that keeps the tempo of movement, and of the fact that crunk music inherently invites a corporeal engagement with the beat, then we have to heed the calls for a sex-positive reading that is attuned to possibility, even as we're always attuned also to objectification, commodification, hypersexualization, and more. Finally, the fact that Black women's bodies can mark time and control its pace is no insignificant claim when we consider Sharon Patricia Holland's observation that if, quote, the Black appears as the antithesis of history, i.e. Black folks occupy space, the white or white people represents the industry of progressiveness being in time. So essentially she is saying Black folks are seen as occupying space but never being in history, right? Where white folks are seen as always being in control of time. So what does it mean if Black women claim command of the beat and claim command of time in a world where Black people have never been seen as people who can own time, be progressive, be at the forefront, be the future? We're always behind, you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. Right? So Black women keeping the tempo of any space and marking time through their bodies disrupts the thrust of American racial history that continually reads Black bodies as outside of time and outside of progress. Beyonce and Sierra's corporeal engagements with the percussive invite us to disrupt that kind of narrative, to recognize that political process is not linear, but it is moving to its own sure and steady beat. So finally, because I want to make sure that I manage time. One important insight, well, let me say this. Percussive feminisms, particularly as they're iterated in crunk spaces, invite us to locate the creative axes of women's power. What moves us? How do we find ways to move through social spaces that have been constructed to be hostile? What is our beat and how do we ride it? Where do we steer it? And when we invite folks to study how we ride it, what kinds of things do we want them to see, perceive, take away, and carry with them? One important insight that fellow purveyors of percussivity should take away, having trained their eyes attentively towards Black women's bodies, is a clear sense of the audacious forms of pleasure that Black women articulate in percussive and crunk spaces. Rather than being concerned only or primarily with the Black female posterior as a sign of Black female objectification, which is prelude to affective experiences of sorrow, anger, and pain, percussive approaches ask us to train our senses to the person's body, train our senses to accumulations of affect happening as the viewer studies the person's body moving in time with the beat. Affect, Sarah Ahmed argues, does not reside in an object or sign, but is an effect of the circulation between objects and signs. Percussive feminism makes space for Black female posteriors to accumulate other kinds of affective value, such that they do not merely become a sign that signifies Black female sexuality as a locus of oppression. Rather, the oral kinetic modes through which Black women engage crunk beats and other forms of percussion articulate the gyrating Black female booty as a space of pleasure and agency, where the Black female body has been tethered in scholarship to a space of abjection and exploitation because of very real and persisting histories of commodification and violence. Percussive feminisms, by way of reference to crunk aesthetics, assert that the Black female booty can circulate in other kinds of affective economies, producing other kinds of impressions, meanings, and accumulations. Or to say it how Janelle Monáe and Erykah Badu might say it. We got the drums so tight, baby. Here comes the freedom song. Too strong, we moving on. Baby, this melody will show you another way. Been trying for far too long. Come home and sing your song, but you gotta testify because the booty don't lie. Thank you.
Before we open up to Q&A, I'm sure that after a talk like that, there are a lot of questions and comments. I'm sure most, if not all of you, would like to engage with Professor Cooper on that. But before we do that, I'd like to thank the African American Studies program at Montclair State for having joined us in being able to bring Professor Cooper to campus. And the director, Sandra Lewis, Professor Sandra Lewis, could I invite you? I think you want to come up and present Professor Cooper with a gift, an award of some sort. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. How are you doing? So, I'm Dr. Sandra Lewis, and I direct the African American Studies program here. And every April, we have what we call our Black Woman Scholar Warrior presentation. So we try to find women who are using their scholarship to create change in the world, Black women. This year, I was hunting around trying to think, who would I bring, what would I do? And literally, the next day, Fausia sends me an email saying, do you think we want to co-sponsor Dr. Brittney Cooper? I was like, I was just looking at her stuff online, thinking, yeah. I was like, my life got so much easier all of a sudden, right? So I was incredibly honored to have the opportunity to co-sponsor this event. We have, as all of you know, the reason Black Studies exists as a discipline is because students said, we're going to change this thing. We're going to make a difference in the world. And there were so many women that figured prominently in the establishment of Black Studies and also in the establishment of Black women's studies. So a part of that, a part of why Black women's studies exist is because we want to make sure that people are exposed to the scholarship of Black women. It is one of the things that Black women's studies can do in the academy. So with the little bit of resources I have each year, I try to make sure that I do that. So we've had some great people here and some elders who we presented awards to, and one of those happened to be Lorraine Hansberry's sister, Miss Mamie Hansberry. A couple of years ago, we had Miss Louise Merriweather, who wrote the book Daddy Was a Number Runner. She was 80-something years old. She's like been a communist and a socialist for so long, and she took the train here by herself, and then went shopping in Montclair. And was still like a part of all these activist groups, you know, and still is, I think, and her birthday's coming up in May, so I need to try to call her, right? So we've had these great women, and we've given them awards, but I wanted to make sure that we also recognize you with this Black Woman Scholar Warrior certificate, which reads, Black Woman Scholar Warrior. This certificate is presented to Dr. Brittney Cooper, whose life work combines scholarship with activism to foster social change and community well-being. Wow.